The night was thick with fog, the kind that blurred the world into ghostly shapes and whispered secrets through the trees. I gripped the wheel tighter as my car rolled slowly down the empty country highway. The headlights were useless, just twin beams swallowed by the mist. I could barely see the faded white lines on the road. Somewhere in the background, my car radio hissed with soft static, then, strangely, started playing a song. It was an old love tune, but something was off. The melody was warped, dragging like a voice underwater. And then I realized why. It was playing backwards. A shiver crawled up my spine. I leaned forward, squinting at the road, and that's when I saw it. A glinting green sign through the haze. Raven Bridge, next exit 1 mile. I'd never heard of it before. Still, I slowed down and flicked on my signal. Something about that name. It tugged at a distant memory I couldn't quite reach. Maybe it was just the fog, the strangeness in the air, or that haunting backward song still bleeding from the speakers. But I turned. As I exited the highway, the atmosphere grew heavier, like the fog wasn't just around me, but pressing through me. The trees that lined the narrow road were skeletal and black, their branches dripping from the rain that had passed. A gust of wind rattled the steering wheel, and I caught a whiff of wet wood and something else. Something older, like damp stone and rusted iron. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. A single text notification lit up the screen. But as I reached for it, the signal died. Just like that. No bars. No service. Only the dead screen and the rising tension in my chest. That's when I saw her. A lone figure stood ahead on the bridge railing. I hit the brakes. She didn't move. She looked like a statue carved out of moonlight and sorrow, her body silhouetted against the fog. A white shawl clung to her shoulders, soaked through and hanging in tatters. Her hair was matted to her face. She stood sideways, barefoot on the ledge, arms by her sides, gazing down at the river below like it had called her by name. I stared. The car slowed to a crawl and stopped without my foot on the brake. The engine groaned once, then stalled. Everything went dark. No headlights, no dashboard, no radio. Just me and her, and the sound of the wind whispering across the wooden slats of Raven Bridge. I sat frozen, fingers on the steering wheel, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Was she real? Was she in trouble? I wasn't sure what made me reach for the door handle, but I did. And in that exact moment, the fog swallowed the bridge behind me. Everything outside the car turned to shadow. "Hello," I called out, cracking the door open. My voice sounded too loud in the silence. The figure didn't turn. She didn't speak. But I swear, I felt her see me. I stepped out into the chill, my shoes crunching on wet gravel. The air wrapped around me like ice water. When I looked back at the bridge, she was gone. Just gone. And all that remained was the thick fog, the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the faint echo of that reversed love song, still playing faintly in my head. The cold wrapped around me like a second skin as I stepped out of the stalled car. The fog swallowed everything beyond the bridge, muting the world into silence. My breath came in sharp, uneven clouds, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked timber and something metallic, something like rust or old blood. The figure was gone. 1 second, she stood motionless on the railing, staring into the void. The next, vanished, as though the mist had taken her back. I stood there, blinking into the gray wall, waiting for her to reappear. Nothing did. The car behind me clicked softly as it cooled. I reached back through the open door and flipped on the emergency lights. Red flashes lit the fog in rhythmic pulses, painting the bridge in a surreal strobe of color and shadow. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the bridge, something shimmered faintly, barely visible, but enough to tug at my legs, pulling me forward. It was a strange light, not white or yellow, but silvery and sickly, like moonlight warped through water. I stepped onto the wooden boards. They creaked beneath my feet, wet and slick. My heart pounded louder than my footsteps. Every groan from the plank sounded like a voice murmuring below, just under the surface. I kept walking, slowly, carefully. The fog swirled like hands around my legs. Halfway across, I froze. Something was on the ground. A scrap of white cloth, delicate, old, and torn at the edges, clung to a jagged splinter of wood. It fluttered as if touched by breath. I bent down and picked it up. It was heavy with moisture, and as I turned it over in my hands, I realized it wasn't just any cloth. It was part of a shawl, the same shawl I'd seen on her. Beneath it, the boards were stained. A deep, dark smear stretched across the wood like a wound that had never fully healed. I backed up a step, and the bridge let out a long, aching groan. My chest tightened. The silence around me thickened. And then I saw the light again. This time, it wasn't on the bridge. It flickered across the river, floating just above the water. There was no boat, no reflection, just that faint silver flare, hovering like a candle in the air. I stared, transfixed. Then I heard it, a soft voice carried by the wind. Not a word, not even a sound I could name, just the feeling of a whisper brushing against my ear. I turned. There she was again. The woman stood at the bridge's edge, back where I had come from. Only now she glowed faintly in the moonlight, like she wasn't entirely real, like her presence fought to exist. Her eyes were on me, hollow, lost. Her white shawl hung in tatters, soaked and swaying in the breeze. She raised one hand, slowly, and pointed, not at me, but behind me. I didn't dare turn around, not yet. I stared at her as my breath caught in my throat. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes, they pleaded, begged, urged. Then, I heard it again, louder this time, a whisper. Michael! It was my name, but it wasn't her voice. It was Mike's, my brother, dead for 3 years. And in that instant I knew, this wasn't just about the woman anymore. Something deeper was unraveling, something tied to both of them, something waiting in the dark. I turned to look behind me, and the bridge shuddered. I didn't breathe. The woman, she, stood at the edge of the bridge where I'd just come from, pale against the void, glowing faintly like a memory refusing to fade. Her hand trembled as she pointed behind me. Not at me, behind me. That's when I heard it. My name. Michael. The voice wasn't hers. It was deeper, familiar in a way that made my blood run cold. It was Mike, my brother's voice, my dead brother's voice. I spun around, heart jackhammering in my chest. Nothing but mist. The bridge stretched behind me in decaying planks and faded shadows, slick with rain. But something felt wrong. The air was too still, too heavy. The wood beneath my feet creaked again, this time sharper, strained, as if holding its breath. Then came the second whisper. Michael! Closer. And then the sound that split me open inside. A crack. A deep, splintering groan echoed from underfoot. I stumbled back instinctively. The board where I just stood bowed and cracked straight through, a jagged line tearing through the bridge like a wound. The entire span shuddered beneath me. Instinct screamed, run. But the bridge didn't give me a choice. More cracks followed, a chorus of wood breaking under pressure. I turned and ran toward the edge, toward the woman, if she was even still there. But the fog was swallowing everything now, and I could barely see my own hands. The planks behind me broke apart in thunderous snaps, the structure groaning like a beast in its death throes. My feet slipped on the wet boards. I pitched forward, slammed down hard, pain flaring in my ankle. I gasped, crawled, forced myself up, then a sound like a scream. No, 100 screams tangled together, ripped through the night. The bridge collapsed. The entire middle section behind me split apart, and the river below surged up like it had been waiting. The black water rose with terrifying force, swallowing the falling planks in seconds, dragging the broken wood and metal down into its throat. I hurled myself off the last solid stretch and hit the gravel with a sickening crack. Pain burst in my leg. I didn't need a doctor to tell me it was broken. I tried to scream, but all I could manage was a gasp. The world swayed, my vision blurred. From where I lay, I watched the final piece of the bridge, Raven Bridge, sink into the river with a groan that sounded far too human. The mist began to thicken again, drawing a curtain over what had just happened. Somewhere, faint and eerie, the melody of a music box drifted through the fog. A lullaby I hadn't heard in years. The last thing I saw before my vision went black was that woman standing at the river's edge. She didn't vanish this time. She just stared. And I knew somehow that I had not escaped her. Not really. Something had just begun. I came to on the side of the road, my leg a screaming throb of pain, my clothes soaked and stuck to my skin. Red and blue lights shimmered through the fog, distant and dreamlike, until I heard voices, real ones, getting closer. An officer knelt beside me. I remember his flashlight beam hitting my face, and how the world seemed to spin with every blink. He was saying something, but all I could hear was the lullaby. That song. Soft, tinkling, distant, but so familiar it wrapped around my spine like a cold hand. I blinked and turned my head. There, lying just a few feet from me, was something impossibly out of place. A porcelain music box, cracked, soaked through, but unmistakable. Blue roses painted along the sides, the chipped lid barely hanging on its hinge. I reached for it with shaking fingers, ignoring the pain in my leg. My hand trembled as I lifted it from the gravel. The lid creaked open. The melody played instantly. It wasn't just any lullaby, it was Mike's. The very same box I gave him for his birthday years ago. I hadn't seen it since his funeral. I had asked the funeral home to bury it with him. But it was here, in the middle of the road, beside the ruins of Raven Bridge, and it still played. The notes were off, faint and warbling like the tune had been stretched by time. Still, I knew it. Every note struck a chord in my chest, pulling memories I had buried deep. Mike opening the gift with a grin. Mike humming the lullaby in the dark when he couldn't sleep. Mike placing it on his nightstand, the last thing he ever kept beside him. A gentle tug on my arm snapped me back. The officer who found me crouched down, his face tight with concern. "You're lucky to be alive," he said softly. "Bridge gave way sometime last night, collapsed into the river. But..." He hesitated. I could see it, whatever he wasn't saying. "But what?" I rasped. "They found someone else," he said. "On the far bank. A woman. No ID. Looked like she'd been... drowned. But not recently." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just nodded slowly, the music box now silent in my hand. Later, at the hospital, I examined it again. The bottom was faintly scratched, worn down by time and water. But just above the edge, I saw it. Engraved initials, E.T. And beneath it, a date. 1948. The same year Mike had mentioned once in passing. The same name that had appeared in a story he once told me, one I hadn't believed. A woman at Raven Bridge, waiting for someone who never returned. A local legend he'd stumbled across while researching ghost stories for his blog. Back then, I laughed it off. But now, sitting alone in a hospital room with this damp, broken music box in my lap, I wasn't laughing. I wasn't even breathing, because the music had followed me here. I could still hear it. No longer from the box itself, but from the corners of the room. From the hallway. From somewhere else. I closed the lid. It kept playing. I lay awake that night, listening to the soft murmurs in the darkness, certain the lullaby had slipped its way into my mind. The hospital room was too bright, too sterile. White sheets, humming machines, and the dull buzz of fluorescent lights. Yet all I saw was that music box and the initials E.T. etched in faded black. Daylight didn't bring comfort. It brought questions. I hobbled to the chair by the window and stared at the world beyond. The town of Ravenswood, its rooftops and trees half hidden by morning mist that lingered like a promise of what I still needed to confront. The bridge was gone, and yet I felt its absence in my bones. I opened my laptop and typed Raven Bridge 1948 into the search bar. The results were minimal. Brief local news clippings, a few grainy photographs, and an old blog post Mike had written 5 years ago. His title, Elena Taylor, The Bride Who Waited. I clicked it with trembling fingers. Mike's words described a tragedy that had sewn itself into the town's memory. In October of 1948, a young woman named Elena Taylor had stood on Raven Bridge, waiting for her fiancé, Thomas Reed, to join her for their wedding anniversary. He never arrived. His car was found empty at the foot of the lane below, engine still running, blood staining the driver's seat. Elena was found the next morning, drowning in the river, clutching a torn piece of her wedding shawl. No note, no explanation, just grief and unanswered questions. I leaned back and closed my eyes, feeling the echo of her sorrow reach out through time. The initials E.T. matched. The date matched. My chest tightened with the gravity of it. She hadn't just been a ghost story. She had been real. But why had her music box ended up in my hands? Why had her song reached me when I had nothing to do with Elena or her lost love? And why had Mike's voice guided me back that night? I scrolled through Mike's blog. He'd been obsessed with paranormal research. Raven Bridge topped his list of haunted sites. He wrote about unexplained engine failures, phantom footsteps on the boards, and the recurring lullabies said to lure drivers to the edge. One line stopped me cold. I feel her calling me to finish what she couldn't. I shut the laptop and stared at the wall. Finish what she couldn't. Was that why her music box appeared? Because she needed someone, me, to uncover the truth? To lay her spirit to rest? I pressed my palm to the music box on the bedside table. The porcelain was icy under my hand. I felt its tremor, faint, as though something inside of it was still alive, still waiting. I had to go back. I had to stand where Elena had waited, and where Mike's final blog entry hinted he'd last been searching. I needed to see the river's dark surface, hear its current rushing through the broken pilings, and understand why their voices echoed together in the fog. Tomorrow, I would leave this hospital. Tomorrow, I would find Raven Bridge's new ruins and confront whatever lingered beneath its waters. Because Elena Taylor's story had become mine, and I couldn't rest until her song ended for good. The sky above Ravenswood had cleared, but the fog in my mind hadn't. I couldn't stop staring at the photo. It was buried deep in the archives of the town's historical society, an old sepia-toned wedding announcement clipped from a 1948 newspaper. The bride in the image wore a long lace dress and a delicate white shawl. Her eyes, even frozen in grainy ink, were distant, hollow. I didn't need the caption to tell me her name was Elena Taylor. I already knew. It was her, the woman from the bridge. I closed the folder and leaned back in the creaking chair of the tiny reading room. It was silent here, save for the occasional tick of the wall clock and the shifting of old papers. But in my head, I heard the music box again, soft and broken, the lullaby winding through my thoughts like a thread. I was losing sleep. I hadn't gone back to the hospital. I told them I'd follow up later. What could I say? That a ghost from 1948 had saved me from falling into the river? That my dead brother had whispered my name across time? It wasn't just Elena anymore. It was Mike. Back in my apartment, I pulled out one of Mike's old notebooks. I hadn't looked through his research since the funeral. He used to keep everything: paranormal stories, case files, reports, scribbled notes about ghost sightings. He believed in all of it. I didn't. Not until now. Flipping through page after page, I found the name again. Raven Bridge. He'd circled it in red ink, written beneath it. Multiple reports. Woman in white. Same spot, same hour, same fog. There were testimonies from locals, people who'd seen a woman standing still on the bridge, staring into the water. A few had even heard her humming. Some swore they'd seen her fall, only for the river to show no ripples. Then I found the page that stopped my breath cold. It was a sketch, a rough pencil drawing of Elena's face. But in Mike's version, she wasn't looking into the water. She was looking out, at someone, at him, and beside the drawing, a note. She's not calling for help. She's warning someone. I dropped the notebook. Was she trying to warn me? I thought about the moment she pointed, just before the bridge collapsed. If I hadn't listened, if I hadn't seen her raise her hand, I would have been swallowed whole. So why had she saved me? And why had I heard Mike's voice? I turned back to the drawing. There was another note at the bottom, scribbled in a slant I recognized from his later days. Shaky, desperate. The two stories are connected. She's looking for someone. So am I. I sat in silence for a long time, piecing it together. Mike had gone to Raven Bridge before he died. Not randomly, not just for a blog post. He'd gone because of her. Because of what he'd found in the music box. Or maybe what had found him. I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the cracked porcelain box. It was quiet now, but when I lifted the lid, the lullaby started again, slow and warped like a dying breath. That same chill filled the air. I glanced at the mirror on the far wall and froze. For a split second I saw Mike's face behind mine. Not smiling, not whole, just watching. And beside him, Elena. Her shawl fluttering in an unseen wind, her eyes filled with something ancient and unbearable. Then they were gone. I shut the box, but I knew. Neither of them had left. They were tied together. And now, they were tied to me. I returned to the ruins of Raven Bridge just before dusk, when the last slivers of sunlight bled into the fog. The air was colder than I remembered, sharper, as if the river itself had learned how to breathe. What remained of the bridge jutted like broken bones from the water, charred wood and rusted nails half swallowed by the current. I stood at the edge of the riverbank, the place where the collapse had spit me out. My crutches dug into the soft earth. My cast was damp with dew. The porcelain music box I'd brought with me, the second one, felt weightless in my pocket. I hadn't told anyone about it. It had appeared on my doorstep 3 nights ago, dry and pristine, wrapped in nothing but silence. Identical to the first in every way. Blue roses, porcelain shell, same cracked lid. Except this one had never been touched by water, and it played the same lullaby. Only now, at the end, the melody broke, warped into a sour, distorted note like a whisper caught in a scream. That same night, I'd woken up to find it open on my nightstand. It had played on its own. Tonight, I had to return it. I stepped carefully toward the water's edge. Fog curled off the surface like smoke from something still burning beneath. Glass again. That's when I saw them. 2 reflections, side by side in the water. One was Elena, still, pale. Her white shawl rippled even though there was no wind. Her eyes were fixed on something beyond the water, beyond time. The other was Mike. He wasn't smiling. His eyes weren't sad. They were empty, as if something inside him had drained out long ago. But they were never together. No matter how I shifted, no matter how long I stared, their reflections never looked at each other. I whispered, "Why?" The music box in my hand stirred. I knelt and placed it gently on the stones, just inches from the river. The moment I did, a breeze lifted through the fog. The lullaby began to play. Not from the box, but from the air, from the river, from everywhere. And then I saw the truth. Not in visions, not in dreams, in memory. Not mine, but theirs. A rush of images poured through me like water through shattered glass. Elena, alone on the bridge in 1948, waiting for a man who had already vanished. Mike, decades later, following her legend, trying to speak to the dead because he never got to say goodbye to me. Because I never got to say goodbye to him. They were linked, both left behind. Both trying to warn, not haunt. The lullaby swelled and cracked again at the final note. I looked down. The music box had stopped playing, but now it was open. Inside lay something new, a small folded photograph. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was old, water-stained, but the faces were clear. Elena Taylor, Thomas Reed, and between them, smiling wide, stood a young boy, holding a music box in his hands. My throat closed. The boy was Mike. Somehow, Mike had found something I hadn't. Some hidden history, some forgotten truth. Had he been a descendant of Thomas? A relative of the Taylors? I didn't know. Maybe he didn't know either. But it didn't matter anymore. They had all come here to wait for someone. Now they could leave. The air grew still. The fog pulled back. And in the river, the reflections faded. Finally together. I stayed until the lullaby faded into silence. Then I picked up the music box, closed it for the last time, and walked away from Raven Bridge. I never returned. But some nights, when the fog is thick and the house is quiet, I hear the faintest note drift through the walls. It's always the same tune. Always that broken, final key. And I know I'm not alone. Not quite.